Hi, I'm Ziza. I'm an adult with sensory processing disorder and ADHD. I'm also an attorney, so I use an avatar and nickname so that I can keep my job. My channel is primarily a place for me to talk about my experiences as a personal diary and info dump, but of course, you're free to listen in. Today, I'm going to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy and why I think it's of the devil. Okay, some of you love CBT, but I'm not you, and you're not me. You love it. I don't. People need to find the modality that is good for them. I'm here because I was harmed by CBT as a direct result of my neurobiology, and I want to validate the experiences of other people like me. For people like me who are visual thinkers, meaning that I literally think in photorealistic images and video, and also associative thinkers, meaning that my mind rapidly associates each thought with a slew of related images and pictures and all the emotions that go with them. Ah, man. For me, CBT is effectively psychological poison. So I'm going to explain why some particular CBT techniques were so painfully harmful to me and which therapy modalities ultimately proved useful. I first tried talk therapy in the early 2000s, more than a decade before I became a lawyer, to work on some issues that I was having from, we'll call it family crud. I worked with an educated professional who I maintain a sense of respect and affection for to this day. Her husband was a dentist, and I could still see her in her office, which was just down the hall from her husband's dentistry practice, 4 doors down. The smell of tooth cleaning and epoxy pervaded our sessions. Like me, her son is an attorney in town. Who knew that money smelled like hard work and epoxy? Just kidding. Maybe. Anyway, she was a lean woman with sensibly shoulder length hair who would purse her lips together with a sly grin to indicate bemusement. I knew then and know now that she had my best interests at heart. I know this because she faced some legitimate risks to herself in order to work with me. Perhaps I'll get into more of those details in a new podcast I'm considering, but for now, let's stick to my hatred of CBT. And on that note, I just briefly want to explain why I have this disgusting background behind me and this hair and this particular clothing choice. Well, all of these things essentially visually represent CBT for me. Anyway, even with all of that going well with this counselor, and I mean, let's be real, even if someone's insurance will pay for therapy, that combo of things is not super easy to come by. So, how was it that talk therapy with this woman pushed me toward despair and ultimately contributed to a lifelong physical illness when I was absolutely willing to change to make myself and my situation better? Well, cognitive behavioral therapy, even done right, on someone like me with my visual and associative thinking, is pretty much a weapon of psychological destruction. That's why. It was so horrible that I avoided even a whiff of counseling for far too long thereafter and credit God for escaping with my sanity. Okay, so my brain works in ways that doesn't play well with CBT. Like many people with autism, and even though I don't have autism, I have an extreme visual thinking brain. This means that as I see, think about, or remember things, my brain pulls up a file on each of those things that is full of images and video footage related to it. One of my favorite folks who talk about visual thinking is Temple Grandin. When I listen to her, I feel much less alone in the world. Sometimes I will watch or listen to her on repeat just to have those moments of communing with someone else like me. So, Temple Grandin explains that for her, when someone mentions a church steeple, for example, she doesn't just see some sort of generic representation of a steeple in her mind. No, she sees photorealistic examples of church steeples that she's seen before. Well, duh. Doesn't everyone's brain do that? Well, apparently not. Honestly, it was after becoming aware of Temple Grandin that I first learned that not everybody's brain works this way. That explained a lot. In any case, there's another aspect of visual thinking that is very, very important. In some people, there can be some big empathy and emotions associated with having a visual brain. For example, when I ask my husband if he turned the stove off when we leave the house, I'm probably more invested in his answer than your average person because I've already, quote, seen the house burn down in my mind's eye, down to the detail, as one possible outcome among many. This means that I've probably got bigger feelings about whether or not he turned the stove off than someone who hasn't had this preemptive quasi experience of, quote, seeing various potential consequences play out in photorealistic detail in their mind's eye. Now, like many other people with SPD, ADHD, or autism, I also have a brain that operates on associative thinking. Not only will my brain pull up files of images and video in rapid succession upon every visual input or memory, but it will also store them based on associations. The associations might be based on similar or contrasting concrete or abstract features. For example, associating two things that are shaped like a stop sign would be an association based on concrete features, whereas one thing being really slow and the other really fast would be an example of an association based on an abstraction. So it doesn't matter necessarily if there's a similarity or a difference, they could still be associated. In this case, the slow thing might be attached to an image of leaking hydraulic fluid, and the other might be attached to an image of a stopwatch, for example. Okay, I know I said that other part was important. And you know what? So is this next part. It's a key as to why I hate CBT so very much. Deep, deep down. Those associations that my brain makes to things, yeah, those associations can be very long term and or permanent. Yes, permanent. Because I have SPD, my brain doesn't habituate as much or as easily as other people's to repetitive things. And that's just a fancy way of saying that my brain doesn't get used to stuff. So, whereas someone else's brain might get used to something and no longer feel the need to remind them of it, mine might not. On the positive side, I can remain genuinely grateful for things pretty much forever because for whatever reason, my brain just doesn't habituate or get used to the new awesome thing. And again, on the negative side, things that I once liked could be forever poisoned. Some of you are starting to understand where this is headed already. For example, I am not capable of thinking about a street that I used to live on without thinking about a horror movie that a friend's mother showed me out of a self centered need to be the neighborhood cool mom. I see various photorealistic images and footage in my mind's eye of not only the street, etc., but also the movie. Yuck. The street is permanently associated with that horrible movie in a way that I am forced to remember that movie and have to see and experience the images from it again and again and again and again every time I think of that street. The horrible movie has been forever added to the image file for that street. How much would you like to live on a street that every time you drove down it, someone showed you a file folder full of images and videos from something that once disturbed you, and they never stopped? It should make sense to you then. And oh, by the way, I should probably say, I was in junior high when this happened. So this was decades ago. It should probably make sense to you then that if something substantially bad has happened on a particular day, I'm probably going to put on or change into an outfit that I hate, like the one my avatar is wearing right now, as quickly as possible so that the yuck is associated with something that I don't particularly care about anyway. That way, it's not really a loss. I also have dedicated movies, foods, and activities that are divided into categories based on what has happened. I can't tolerate having those categories mixed because if they mix, then I lose the ability to fully enjoy the good stuff. FYI, this is also why I loathe the character Sadness in the movie Inside Out, since she maniacally runs around, well, not maniacally, evilly runs around poisoning otherwise pure memories. But I digress. It gets even worse. Not only may I be able to be unable to forget something, no matter how long ago it happened. But because my brain intakes, recalls, and associates with unbelievable rapidity, any bad memory could be attached to any number of other memories. Again, this works in the positive as well, but the positive is not what led me to experience harm from CBT. All right. Now I'm going to talk about some aspects of CBT that I found particularly detrimental. I'm going to run through them pretty much in rank order of how much I hate and despise them for my type of brain. Number one, exposure therapy. This is downright harmful to me, even when done well. As I said, I don't habituate as easily as a neurotypical, if at all. So the whole premise of this is inappropriate for me because my brain doesn't habituate like other people's brains do. As I went through painstakingly slow exposure therapy, the bad associations were only strengthened instead of lessened over time. This had the opposite effect of what was intended, really driving the association and big, horrible feelings in. Because, as I said, I don't habituate like other people. Then, of course, the association spread to other things in my current environment because I was asked to revisit things from my past multiple times a month. That's like saying to me, oh, you have an extreme disgust for sardines and become sensitive to their smell every time you smell them? Okay, let's smear the tiniest bit of sardines on everything in your environment a couple times a week and just let that rot there. It's not going to hurt you. And we'll add a little bit more rotten fish each time until you learn to ignore it. Hey, maybe you'll learn to love rotten fish. Meanwhile, my entire life is now coated with the smell of rotting sardines, and the stench just keeps getting stronger. Exposure therapy was essentially masochist boot camp. And as a compliant client, I started to behave in very masochistic ways even outside of therapy. I knew my counselor was well trained, so I just thought if I just stuck with it long enough that it would start to work. I mean, it made sense to me what she was saying, but it didn't work. Not only was I not experiencing less distress over time, but I was experiencing more and more distress over time. She couldn't understand why, and at first, I think she thought I was just resistant for some other reason. But I wasn't. And I became more and more emotionally unstable and disturbed and self loathing. I was essentially practicing self loathing. Of course, I had to leave CBT therapy, and I'm thankful that I was able to get out of this horrible trap before I suffered something worse. I can't help but wonder if there are other people who don't. And that's a truly sobering thought. Number two, another CBT tactic that I found distressing and harmful. Oh, wait, did I say tactic? Maybe I should say technique. No, I like tactic. Another CBT tactic that I found distressing and harmful was any attempt to change thought and feeling through incremental changes to behavior. I experienced this as outright sadistic. I was already a professional at this. Every day of my life was packed full of doing the quote, right behavior against how my mind works and against my feelings. And I already continually thought that eventually my thinking and emotions would just relent and get in line with my behavior. You know, like a mild and friendly form of what they do to prison. You know what else? Continually violating my own behavioral needs and emotions hadn't changed my thoughts to date. So I shouldn't have been surprised that doing the same thing with more effort under the supervision of a trained therapist didn't work either. And now I know that I have an underlying issue based on primal and other neurobiological brain structures that just don't change that much. All of that, all of it was nothing more than a fool's errand. This CBT tactic was not only something that I was already obsessively doing, which is called masking in neurodivergent circles, but after receiving the right type of treatment for me, I now know that this is part of what I needed to do less and escape from. I experienced this change your thoughts and feelings through minor changes to behavior as rather like running into a police station to escape someone who had beat me up, only to have the police officer tell me, I'll be happy to help you. Here's a stick to beat yourself up. Number three, stress reduction techniques that involve noticing the stress response and, quote, sitting with it and trying to see that it, quote, isn't inherently harmful. My interoception is weak for some things and too strong for others. Interoception is essentially your ability to know what your body organs are doing. So that means that I don't notice certain signals from my organs and body processes until they're essentially screaming at me. That's hyposensitivity for interoception. Other body signals are way louder or stronger than they would be in a neurotypical pretty much all the time. That's hypersensitivity for interoception. This is not something that is very amenable to change, even with a seasoned occupational therapist, much less and certainly not through talk therapy. Because these issues with interoception that arise out of my SPD wired brain, because of these issues with interoception that arise out of my SPD wired brain, my ability to feel anxiety is limited until it's pretty damn high. So there really isn't a way to intercept it on the way up the ladder. It's closer to either on or off. And further, let me get this straight. I'm supposed to make sure that every time I feel really high anxiety, because that's when I'm able to notice it, that I connect all of the images, videos, and emotions of whatever is causing that super high anxiety to my very own body. But then I'm going to be doing that every time I get to high anxiety, just continually heaping on more and more yucky associations onto my body that will then be crushingly recalled the next time and potentially every time I notice that I'm feeling anxiety later. What a disaster. In my opinion, this is capital E evil. I can't believe that people are still out there doing this to people like me. Why not just take a baseball bat to our heads and then be sure to charge us our copay on the way out? Number 4, attempting to heal emotions through challenging thoughts and or considering alternative ways of thinking and or questioning one's thoughts and beliefs. What do I really know? Why do I think that? Do I have anything to confirm this belief? First off, it turned out that there wasn't as much that the counselor could find wrong with my thinking as perhaps we had both hoped. I was already an over intellectualizer, and what I actually needed was to get a break from that. What I didn't need was to be encouraged to try even harder in my efforts at challenging my own thinking, which I was already compulsively doing. My brain isn't a docile sequential process, it's a rapid fire association generator. So the associations don't stop coming or forming just because my mind is occupied. It's always occupied, always changing, and always displaying more images and forming new associations. Have I thought of that possibility? Yes, I've thought of that possibility. Next. Because there is such a focus in CBT of questioning one's own thoughts and perceptions about things, which I was already doing to a stupidly excessive degree, I had an expert psychiatrist do an evaluation of me. He came to the same conclusion that my thoughts on my own situation were all in line with reality and that I needed to get away from CBT and actually address what ailed me. Ugh. As I even look through this list with what I know now, it just makes me so thankful to God that I got out of this treatment modality and that I gave other forms of therapy a try much later. So, if you have a brain like mine or love someone with a brain like mine, you might be interested to know what types of therapy I ended up finding helpful. Well, I'll tell you. If you promise to understand that you're not me and I'm not you and I'm not a healthcare provider, so I'm not giving any kind of advice regarding your treatment. I'm telling you what helped me. Okay, the types that helped me, and I mean really, truly, profoundly helped me, were psychodynamic, Jungian, attachment based, and psychoanalytic. I had no idea that talk therapy could actually help me despite my neurobiology. True, talk therapy wasn't ever going to change my brain structure into a neurotypical one. Still, there was much that was very helpful. Here's my list. And this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a list of some of the things that I found helpful. Focusing on emotional expression with respect for my categories. Letting the past stay in the past while really spending the time to honor it, digest it, analyze it, and focus on it. This ended up restoring my internal credibility for my original perceptions and building up my confidence in that regard. leading to less internal questioning and more confidence. So, the exact opposite direction of what CBT would have had me do. Talking to me frankly about how I come across to others. So, getting that honest feedback without the annoying sugarcoating. Addressing inappropriate, and I'm not saying my CBT therapist did annoying sugarcoating. She did not, but I have had lots of people talk to me with annoying sugarcoating. And so it was nice to be able to talk to a really good therapist who was not a sugarcoater. Anyway, another thing that was helpful was addressing inappropriate loyalty. Was a big one. Dream processing. So it turns out that my mind also does a lot while I sleep in really cool ways. And I find it really useful to figure out what it's telling me. Another one was radical acceptance of myself. So this person radically accepted me for how I was and provided a safe space for me to show someone else my feelings. Being able to express myself, how I express myself, and talk how I talk was wonderful. As you can probably tell, I ended up years after my CBT experience giving talk therapy another try. And I ended up with a highly competent PhD psychologist who God essentially used to provide me with a sort of partial redo on the parenting that I had or hadn't received. I cannot think of him without a swell of gratitude for both him and God, even choking up. I hope that if you're in need of counseling, that you don't give up on finding the right person for you, and that you will consider that sometimes you might need both the right person and the right modality that works with your brain. Thanks for visiting with me today.